A letter crossed my desk not long ago from a man who had done what the world tells you to do. He worked for 4 decades. He stayed with the same company. He showed up, built a life, paid the bills, raised a family, and did all the ordinary honorable things that make a civilization function. Then at 67 he retired, and instead of feeling free, he felt hollow. That was the word that stayed with me. Not relieved, not proud, not triumphant, hollow. He said it felt as though the structure that had held up his whole adult life had simply been removed overnight. The calendar was suddenly empty. The phone was quieter. The urgency was gone. The role he had been playing for 40 years ended, and with it went a piece of the identity he did not realize had become fused with the work itself. I understood the letter immediately. I am unusual at my age. I still work every day, not because I must, but because I still enjoy the game. That is not normal. Most people do not get to make that choice and would not want to make it even if they could. For them, retirement arrives not as a philosophical idea but as a practical fact. One day the meetings stop, the routine dissolves, the title no longer matters, and the person who thought he was preparing for freedom discovers he was actually stepping into a kind of free fall. That is where I want to begin, because most people think retirement is mainly a money problem. It is not. Money matters. Of course, money always matters, but once a person has crossed the basic threshold of security, retirement becomes something more complicated and more human than a spreadsheet will ever admit. It becomes a problem of identity, rhythm, purpose, health, relationships, regret, and the use of time itself. That is why so many people who look ready from the outside still stumble when they arrive there. They prepared for the economics. They did not prepare for the emptiness. They knew how much was in the account. They did not know who they were going to be on a Wednesday afternoon when no one needed them professionally anymore. That is the mother line of this whole conversation. Retirement is not mainly about stopping work. It is about rebuilding a life. And if you do not understand that, you can have money and still feel lost. You can have a paid-off house, a pension, a brokerage account, and still wake up with the unnerving feeling that the organizing principle of your life has been pulled out by the roots. I have watched enough people move into this phase badly to know the pattern. They think the hardest part was accumulation. Then they reach retirement and discover accumulation was the simple part, because at least accumulation had a script work: save, invest, repeat. Life may have been hard, but it had scaffolding. Retirement removes the scaffolding and asks a much stranger question. Now that no one is assigning your value from the outside, what makes your days worth living from the inside? That is a much harder question. And it is why I want to say something that may surprise you coming from a man who has spent most of his life talking about money. You probably need less money for retirement than you think, but you need more meaning than you think. That is the first real truth. People are often terrified of retirement because they imagine the spending level of working life continuing forever. They imagine endless commuting costs, work clothes, rushed meals, convenience spending, stress spending, professional obligations, and the 1,000 little leaks that attach themselves to a life built around labor. Then they run retirement projections against that old structure and conclude they will need far more than they actually do. Very often that is wrong. Retirement quietly removes many costs before you ever try to cut anything on purpose. You stop driving to the office every day. You stop dressing for somebody else's expectations. You stop eating lunch the expensive way because your schedule left you no choice. You stop outsourcing convenience just to survive the week. If the mortgage is gone, the largest fixed burden in the household may disappear entirely. The life gets cheaper before you even begin trying to simplify it. That matters. I know retirees living comfortably, even joyfully, on balances that would not impress a Manhattan wealth manager. And I know people with far more money who still live like financial hostages because they never learned the difference between enough and more. That difference is everything. A person who does not know what enough looks like can feel poor with $5 million. A person who does know what enough looks like can feel secure with far less. This is not an argument for carelessness. I am not telling you to drift into retirement with no reserves and a cheerful slogan. I am telling you that financial peace is less about the size of the pile than about the relationship between your pile and your life. If your spending remains modest, your needs honest, and your ego out of the equation, the threshold for comfort is often lower than your fear suggested, but once you cross that threshold, something else becomes much more important than squeezing out another return point. Health. I wish more people understood this while they still had time to do something about it. When you are younger, the body forgives you in ways that create dangerous illusions. You eat badly, sleep poorly, move too little, work too much, and the machinery still starts in the morning. That creates a false sense of permanence. People assume resilience is an asset they own. It is not. It is a lease, and the lease gets renegotiated in late life whether you are ready or not. I have watched too many people labor for decades to build enough money for freedom and then arrive too physically compromised to use it. They finally have the time to travel, but the knees are gone. They finally have the freedom to play with grandchildren, but the energy is gone. They finally have the means to enjoy life, but the body has become a management project instead of a partner. That is a hard fate, and a great deal of it is avoidable. You do not need to become some athletic fanatic. You do not need to mistake health for performance theater. But if you are heading toward retirement or already in it, you should treat your body like the most valuable operating asset you own. Walk every day, sleep enough, eat like you are trying to preserve your future, not entertain your impulses. Get the test, pay attention to the signals. Do not romanticize toughness when what you really mean is neglect. All the money in the world becomes strangely small when the body can no longer convert money into a good day. That is why health sits so high in my hierarchy. Now, not because I became saintly, because I became realistic. Then comes another thing retirees often underestimate until it begins slipping away. Curiosity, a mind that stops moving, does not stay young just because the person carrying it still reads the newspaper. Retirement gives people a dangerous amount of empty time, and empty time can be filled either with growth or with slow mental surrender. I have seen both. Some people retire and go mentally dark. They watch, consume, drift, and repeat themselves. They stop learning, they stop stretching, they stop engaging with anything that demands real thought. The body may still be alive for decades after that, but some essential part of the person has already started shutting down. I do not want that for anyone. You must keep learning, not because there is a test at the end, because the mind needs a frontier the way the body needs movement. Read things that make you think. Study a subject you postponed for 40 years because payroll and routine consumed your attention. Learn history properly. Study art, languages, biology, theology, architecture, gardening, geology, markets, whatever. Still light some interior spark. It does not matter much what the subject is. What matters is that you remain interested in becoming larger than you were yesterday. That is the opposite of dying early in spirit. And then, if you want the really painful lesson, here it is: relationships matter more than the scoreboard. I learned that later than I should have. When you are ambitious, work always finds a way to call itself necessary. There is always one more deal, one more report, one more problem, one more opportunity that seems too important to miss. The world flatters the working man by telling him his usefulness is measured in output. That can be a wonderful fuel in the building years. It can also cost you things you do not know you are losing until they can no longer be recovered. Late at night, nobody sits in bed warmly replaying an old quarterly result. They think about people, the conversations, the children, the people they loved well, and the people they neglected, while claiming the neglect was temporary. That is the real ledger. If you are retired now or about to be, then the greatest investment you can make is not another product recommendation. It is attention, serious, undistracted. Generous attention to the people who will still matter when the money and career mythology have stopped talking. Talk to your spouse like a human being again, not like an operational partner in a long-running household enterprise. Sit with your children without trying to manage them. Let your grandchildren remember your face, your voice, your patience, not just the gifts you bought. Those things are the real inheritance. And if retirement does anything well, it returns time to you. The question is whether you will use that time to enlarge your relationships or merely to sit near them while your attention leaks away into screens and habits and passive noise. There is another way retirement can quietly improve life, and most people do not notice it until they try. It gives you permission to simplify. Most of modern life is clutter disguised as achievement. Bigger house, more stuff, more subscriptions, more accounts, more obligations, more maintenance, more things to organize, insure, store, fix, and emotionally drag around. People call that a full life. Often it is just a crowded one. I have always liked simplicity more than fashion. A simpler life is not a smaller life. Very often it is a freer one. Do you need that much house when the children are long gone and the stairs feel steeper every year? Do you need drawers full of objects you do not use, storage spaces you barely remember, and a financial life spread across so many institutions that understanding it becomes a part? Time administrative burden? Probably not. Simplifying is not about deprivation. It is about removing friction from the years that remain. The less you own, the less owns you. The fewer moving parts in your finances, the easier it becomes to understand the whole machine and sleep well at night. The fewer unnecessary expenses, the lower the psychological threshold for enough. Simplicity is deeply underrated because the culture profits when people keep mistaking complication for importance, but in retirement, complication is rarely your friend. It eats time, it eats attention, it creates invisible stress. I would rather have a smaller, cleaner, more intelligible life than a larger one filled with maintenance and noise. Then there is another thing retirement asks you to solve, whether you are ready or not. Contribution. A lot of people think purpose was always work, because work was where purpose had been outsourced for so long. The office, the clients, the hierarchy, the deadlines, the paycheck, all of it created the feeling that you mattered because your labor mattered. Remove that structure, and many people feel suddenly weightless. That is why some retirees decline so quickly. The calendar empties, the external demand vanishes, and with it goes the feeling of significance. They stop being needed professionally and incorrectly conclude they are no longer needed at all. That is one of the saddest errors in later life. You do not need a corporate title to matter. You need usefulness. Those are different things. Maybe you volunteer, maybe you mentor, maybe you help at a school, a church, a local charity, or with a neighbor whose life is harder than yours. Maybe you become the reliable grandparent who turns up, listens, teaches, and steadies the younger people around you. Maybe you finally pour yourself into a craft, a community, a service, or a cause that work never left time for. The form is less important than the function. You need to feel that your time is still converting into something good beyond your own comfort. That is how people stay alive in spirit. A life with no demands may sound relaxing for a while, but eventually it becomes thin. Human beings do not only need freedom, they need a reason to use it. And once you understand that, the question, what am I retiring from, becomes much less useful than what am I retiring toward. That is the real question. Fear, of course, tries to ruin all of this. Fear about money, fear about health, fear about becoming dependent, fear about making a mistake too late to undo it, fear about the market, fear about time itself. I understand the fear. It is not irrational. But fear becomes destructive when it begins making decisions for you. I have seen retirees so afraid of market losses that they effectively guaranteed themselves another kind of loss. They sat entirely in cash for years, congratulating themselves for being prudent while inflation steadily chewed through their purchasing power. They avoided drawdown and accepted erosion. Then, years later, they realized the safe decision had not protected them at all. It had simply harmed them politely. That is what fear does. It narrows your vision until the risk you can see dominates the risks you cannot. The right answer is not recklessness. The right answer is preparation strong enough that fear loses some of its authority. Diversify, hold liquidity, live below your means, do not build your life on rosy assumptions. But after that, stop letting worst-case scenarios occupy the throne. If you have done the basics, well, you are probably sturdier than your fear admits, and then comes perhaps the most difficult thing retirement asks of a person. Make peace with the fact that the old identity is gone. For many people, the hardest part is not the money at all. It is the collapse of professional identity. They were the executive, the engineer, the owner, the manager, the builder, the person with calls to answer and problems to solve, and a recognized place in the social machine. Then retirement arrives, and the world does not ask for those functions in the same way anymore. That can feel like humiliation if you are not prepared for it, which is why purpose beyond work is not a luxury, it is survival. You must build a new center of gravity, not necessarily some enormous dramatic new life project. Sometimes that becomes another vanity trap. A man retires from one machine and tries to replace it immediately with another, just so he does not have to sit in the silence long enough to discover who he is without external applause. I am not interested in applause. I am interested in aliveness. What makes you feel alive now? Not 20 years ago. Now, what makes you useful? What makes you glad to wake up? What makes time feel meaningful rather than merely occupied? Those are the questions worth answering. And as you answer them, one more truth becomes impossible to avoid. You cannot take it with you. This sounds obvious, but almost nobody really believes it until late. People still act like they are in a game of permanent accumulation, as though the purpose of the last chapter is simply to end with the highest possible account value. That is madness if taken too far. Money is a tool, it is not the trophy. The real question is whether you are using it to support a good life, a generous life, a connected life, a meaningful life. If not, then you are merely guarding numbers until someone else inherits them. Be responsible? Yes. Do not be foolish? Yes. But also use the money. Take the trip while your legs still work. Help the child or grandchild who truly needs it. Give to something that reflects your values. Do not worship the account so much that you fail to use it for the only thing it was ever for, the support of a life well lived. And finally, perhaps the hardest lesson of all, make peace with your past. Almost every older person I know carries an inventory of old decisions. Missed chances, wrong turns, words said badly, people neglected, seasons wasted, things that should have been done differently. Regret becomes one of the most corrosive companions in late life if you let it settle in and call itself wisdom. It is not wisdom, at least not if it never moves past self-punishment. You are not required to pretend the past was perfect. That would be childish, but you are required, if you want a good ending, to stop feeding old pain with current energy, learn from it, apologize where you still can, repair what can still be repaired, then stop kneeling before ghosts. The time left is too valuable for that. A good retirement, or a good old age more broadly, is not built on the fantasy that you got everything right. It is built on the decision to use what remains well. That is the great opportunity in this period of life. You may not control how much time remains, but you still control the quality of your attention inside it. You still control whether you fill the days with curiosity or numbness, with relationships or distraction, with bitterness or contribution, with clutter or simplicity, with fear or proportion, with regret or presence. That is why I reject the idea that retirement is an ending. It is a restructuring of what money is for, a restructuring of what time is for, a restructuring of what success is supposed to mean once the career has stopped doing the making on your behalf. And if you handle that restructuring wisely, these can be the richest years, not because they are easiest, but because they are finally honest. No more pretending the title matters more than the people. No more pretending the account matters more than the body. No more pretending accumulation is the goal. Now the goal is simpler and harder at the same time. Enough money, enough health, enough purpose, enough love, enough courage to live the remaining years on purpose rather than by default. That is the game. Now, not maximizing, using, not proving, enjoying, not extending the career mentality into old age, replacing it with something better. So if I were speaking to the 67-year-old man who wrote that letter, I would not tell him to rush out and fill every hour so he never has to feel the emptiness. I would tell him the emptiness is part of the transition. The old scaffolding is gone. Fine. Now build a better one. Build your days around what matters before the calendar fills itself with trivia. Protect your health because it is the gate through which every good plan must pass. Simplify your life so you spend the years living, not maintaining. Stay curious so your mind remains in motion. Invest in people because that is the real compounding. Give back so your freedom does not turn into self-absorption. Do not let fear turn caution into paralysis. Use the money for life rather than using your life to defend the money. Stop letting the past rent space in your final chapters and decide very deliberately what your life is now for. That is retirement done well. Not endless leisure, not glamorous travel photographs, masking inner drift, not guarding money in a dark room, a life with structure, warmth, usefulness, and enough financial calm to let those things matter more than the numbers. That is what I would want, and if you ask me after all these decades what the real measure of a good retirement is, it is not whether you die with the maximum possible net worth. It is whether near the end you can look back and say something far more important. I was here, I was present, I loved well, I used my time, I did not spend the last stretch of my life merely waiting, I actually lived it. That is the standard I respect now, not how much you accumulated, how fully you turned the years into life.